Imagine waking up every morning knowing that you've barely touched the edges of what you're truly capable of. You look in the mirror and sense there's a stronger, sharper, more relentless version of you trapped underneath layers of comfort, fear, and excuses. That mirror, my friend, is the battlefield of life, and that is exactly where David Goggins begins his extraordinary story in Can't Hurt Me. Master your mind and defy the odds. This isn't a soft-spoken self-help book that pats you on the back and tells you to believe in yourself. No, it's a raw, unfiltered, and brutally honest account of a man who dragged himself from the depths of poverty, abuse, racism, obesity, and failure to become one of the toughest human beings alive, a Navy SEAL, an ultra-endurance athlete, and a symbol of what unbreakable mental resilience truly looks like. David Goggins was not born special. In fact, he began his life in a nightmare. His childhood was scarred by relentless physical abuse, poverty, and fear. He grew up working in his father's skating rink, living under the violent tyranny of a man who beat him, his mother, and his brother almost daily. As a young boy, Goggins wasn't learning how to dream. He was learning how to survive. By the time he was a teenager, he could barely read. He was overweight, anxious, and drowning in self-doubt. Statistically, he should have been just another sad story. And yet, he wasn't. That's why the first chapter of his book is titled, I Should Have Been a Statistic. But instead of becoming one, Goggins decided to rewrite his fate. When life handed him a script written in pain, he tore it to pieces and wrote a new one with blood, sweat, and iron will. This transformation didn't happen through luck or talent. It happened through mental mastery, through an unrelenting commitment to self-discipline and personal responsibility. And this is where the big promise of Can't Hurt Me begins. Goggins doesn't just tell his story to inspire you. He tells it to arm you. His message is not, look what I did, but rather, look what you can do. He wants to prove that ordinary people, crushed under the weight of mediocrity and fear, can achieve the extraordinary if they are willing to embrace discomfort, confront their weaknesses, and harden their minds against life's inevitable pain. Throughout the book, Goggins introduces the idea of the calloused mind. Just as your hands develop calluses when you lift heavy weights, your mind can become stronger through consistent exposure to discomfort. Every time you push through pain, every time you silence that voice that says, stop, you are building mental armor. He calls this the process of becoming uncommon among the uncommon, a relentless pursuit of greatness that continues even after you've already achieved more than most. But the foundation of his philosophy rests on radical accountability. Goggins tells us to look deep into the accountability mirror, to strip away every excuse, every comforting lie, and face the ugly truth about who we are and what we've been avoiding. He teaches that growth doesn't begin when you feel ready. It begins when you stop lying to yourself. And once you take ownership of your failures, your fears, your brokenness, you unlock the power to transform them into fuel. Another central promise of Can't Hurt Me is that pain is not your enemy. It's your greatest teacher. Goggins shows, through every brutal chapter of his life, that pain reveals the truth about what you're made of. It's the forge that shapes character, the crucible in which strength and purpose are born. He argues that modern life has made us too soft, too addicted to comfort, too afraid of struggle. And because of that, most of us never discover what lies beyond our limits. He insists that adversity isn't a curse, it's an invitation. An invitation to test your boundaries, to outwork your own doubt, and to build a kind of inner armor that no failure, rejection, or setback can penetrate. When Goggins speaks about taking souls, one of his most famous mental techniques, he means pushing so far past the expectations of others that you shatter their perception of what's possible. It's about turning every obstacle into an opportunity to demonstrate your resilience, not for their approval, but to prove to yourself that you can't be broken. This mindset transforms suffering into strategy and failure into fuel. By the time you reach the end of Can't Hurt Me, you realize this book isn't about Goggins' extraordinary life at all. It's about your untapped potential. It's a mirror held up to your own mind, asking you one haunting question: what if? What if you gave everything you had? What if you stopped making excuses and went all in on your own life? What if you pushed past the pain, the fear, the failure, and discovered who you truly are? That's the ultimate promise of Can't Hurt Me. It's not to make you comfortable, but to make you powerful. To teach you that mediocrity is a choice, that pain is a gift, and that the only true limits are the ones you accept. David Goggins doesn't just tell you to change. He dares you to become unbreakable. Since you already know why this audiobook is so special from the introduction, let's not waste any time and dive straight into Chapter 1. Chapter 1 of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, titled, I Should Have Been a Statistic, opens not with motivation, but with madness, an unflinching descent into the childhood that shaped one of the toughest men alive. It's not a story about courage yet. It's about chaos, fear, and survival. But within that chaos lies the seed of Goggins' central promise to every reader and listener. You can take the worst cards life deals you and still build yourself into something unstoppable. Imagine a young boy, 6 years old, living in what looks like the perfect American suburb. White fences, shiny cars, green lawns. But inside his house, there's a private war raging. That boy is David Goggins. He describes his home on Paradise Road in Williamsville, New York, as a beautiful prison, a place where his father, Trunnies Goggins, ruled like a tyrant. By day, Trunnies was a successful businessman who owned a roller skating rink and nightclub. By night, he was an abuser, a manipulator, a man who unleashed violence on his wife and children with terrifying consistency. What the neighbors saw was success. What the family lived was hell. This first chapter strips away any notion of hero worship and instead throws us into a world where innocence is beaten out of a child long before he can dream of becoming a Navy SEAL. David recalls being forced to work late nights at his father's skating rink, cleaning floors, fixing skates, and inhaling the smell of aerosol deodorizer until his eyes burned. He was a child living an adult's life, overworked, underfed, and terrified. His father's abuse was relentless and cruel. There are scenes in this chapter so vivid. You can almost hear the belt snapping through the air, feel the bruises rising, and sense the silent tears that no one ever came to wipe away. But even amid that horror, I Should Have Been a Statistic is not just about victimhood, it's about transformation. This is the chapter where Goggins lays down his first major truth. We are all born with pain, but we are not born broken. The world may break you down, but only you can decide to stay down. As the story unfolds, we see his mother, Jackie, find the courage to escape. The moment she grabs her 2 sons, packs their things into garbage bags, and drives away from that house of terror is one of the most powerful turning points in Goggins' life. It's his first lesson in resistance, the understanding that freedom comes at a price, and that sometimes survival is the bravest act of all. They flee across state lines to Indiana, with almost no money, no plan, and no certainty, but with a desperate will to start over. However, freedom didn't erase the scars. When David began school again, he was behind academically and emotionally. He stuttered, struggled to read, and felt the full weight of being the only black child in a small, mostly white town. Teachers labeled him slow. Classmates mocked him. Poverty trailed him like a shadow, and every night he watched his mother work long hours just to keep the lights on. The message the world gave him was clear: you will fail. That's what society expected. That's what statistics predicted. Children like him, poor, abused, traumatized, don't grow up to break records or inspire millions. They grow up lost, broken, and forgotten. And that is why this chapter's title hits so hard. I should have been a statistic. It's not just a reflection of his circumstances, it's a defiance of them. Goggins uses this chapter to confront the cold truth that many people live and die as victims of their environment. But he also makes a bold promise. You can take control of your story, even if it begins in pain. He teaches that trauma can be a teacher, that every scar can become a source of strength if you choose to face it instead of flee from it. As an audiobook lover, you can feel the energy shift when Goggins describes the moment he began to harden his mind. He recalls how he stopped crying after beatings, how he stood in front of the mirror, looked at his bruised body, and swore to himself that one day he would no longer be the weak child hiding from his father's rage. That's where the mental callousing began, not during a Navy SEAL Hell Week, but in a dark bedroom, long before he even knew what discipline meant. This chapter is also where Goggins introduces one of his lifelong mantras, hate over fear. When his father threatened him, he stopped trembling and started fighting back, at least internally. Hatred of his father's cruelty became the first spark of the fire that would later fuel his endurance, his toughness, and his refusal to quit. Now, in modern motivational terms, hate may sound extreme, but for Goggins, it was survival energy, a raw emotion that he learned to refine into focus, determination, and ultimately self-mastery. And here lies the big promise of this chapter and, in many ways, of the entire book. Your past does not define you, it refines you. Goggins isn't saying pain is good, he's saying pain is useful. The suffering he endured as a child became the foundation for his mental strength. Every beating became a brick in the wall of his resilience. Every moment of fear became a lesson in endurance. He shows that the human spirit is not as fragile as we think. It bends, it bruises, but it does not have to break. By the end of chapter 1, Goggins shifts from storyteller to mentor. He challenges listeners directly, asking them to face their own pain. He introduces the first of his famous challenges, a call to action for readers and listeners to write down their own bad hand, to confront the excuses, the traumas, the tragedies that hold them back, and use them as fuel. It's his way of saying, your suffering is your story, but it doesn't have to be your ending. I Should Have Been a Statistic is not an easy chapter to listen to, but that's exactly the point. Goggins wants to make you uncomfortable because discomfort is where change begins. He wants you to remember that every life, no matter how broken, carries the potential for greatness if you are willing to do the hard work of healing and growth. So, what is the big takeaway here? It's that resilience isn't born in success, it's forged in struggle. It's not about what happens to you, it's about how you respond to it. Goggins' life began in hell, but through unrelenting honesty, pain, and discipline, he found a way to rise above it all. And that's what this first chapter delivers. A brutal, beautiful reminder that no matter how dark your beginnings, you can still rewrite your story. You can take your pain, your fear, your brokenness, and turn them into your power. Because as Goggins proves from the very start, when you decide to face the fire instead of run from it, life can't hurt you anymore. This is chapter 1 of Can't Hurt Me, the moment where the victim begins his transformation into the warrior, and the reader or listener begins to understand that greatness isn't given to the lucky, it's earned by those who refuse to quit. Chapter 2 of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, titled Truth Hurts, opens like a mirror shattering. Every reflection of comfort, illusion, or denial gets cracked wide open. It's not just a continuation of his story, it's a reckoning. In this chapter, Goggins challenges us to confront the hardest thing any human can face, the truth about ourselves. It's where excuses meet their executioner, where self-deception is stripped away, and where the real work of transformation begins. If Chapter 1 showed us how pain shapes us, then Chapter 2 teaches us that honesty, raw, unfiltered, brutal honesty, is the first step toward reclaiming control over your life. After escaping his abusive father, young David and his mother began to rebuild their lives in Indiana. For a brief moment, there was peace, until tragedy struck again. Goggins' mother met a kind, hard-working man named Wilmoth, a carpenter who treated her with dignity and gave their small family a taste of stability. But that fragile peace was shattered when Wilmoth was murdered, shot multiple times in his own driveway. Goggins was just a teenager, and once again, life reminded him that pain was his constant companion. This event plunged his mother into emotional shock and depression, while David spiraled deeper into confusion, anger, and despair. He stopped sleeping in beds and instead curled up on the floor, symbolically returning to the ground zero of his trauma, where safety meant staying low. As the chapter unfolds, Goggins takes us through his school years, where he struggled academically and socially. He cheated his way through classes because he felt stupid, inadequate, and terrified of being exposed as the dumb kid. He was still haunted by his past, and was now drowning in the belief that he wasn't good enough for anything better. When he looked around, he saw the world moving forward while he stayed trapped in the mud of self-pity and fear. This is where Goggins introduces the emotional heart of the chapter. The truth hurts, but it's also the only thing that can set you free. He realized that his entire life had become a lie, a performance of survival. He pretended to be confident, pretended to be fine, pretended to be capable. But deep inside, he was still the broken boy from Buffalo, living with wounds he never faced. And this realization is what makes this chapter so universally powerful, because whether you're in Los Angeles, London, or Lagos, every one of us knows what it feels like to hide behind a mask. We lie to ourselves about why we're not succeeding, why we're stuck, why we're unhappy. We tell ourselves stories about what we could have been or should have been, but rarely do we sit down and say, "This is who I am right now, and it's not good enough." For Goggins, that moment came one night when he looked in the mirror and saw the truth. He wasn't just out of shape. He was obese, depressed, and utterly lost. He describes standing in front of that mirror, weighing nearly 300 pounds, feeling disgusted with the man staring back at him. But instead of looking away, he kept staring. That mirror became his crucible, a tool he would later call the accountability mirror. It's one of the most transformative ideas in the book, and it begins right here, in Chapter 2. The accountability mirror became his weapon against mediocrity. Every morning, he would stand in front of it and face himself without filters. He would write his goals on sticky notes, things like lose weight, study harder, stop being lazy, and stick them around the mirror so he couldn't escape them. This ritual wasn't about shame. It was about taking ownership. He says, "We like to live in a world where we want to hear that we're great, even when we're not. But the truth is, you have to be willing to call yourself out. You have to face the truth, no matter how much it hurts." That is the big promise of this chapter. You cannot change your life until you're brutally honest about who you are. Goggins makes it clear that denial is the ultimate comfort zone, and most people live their entire lives trapped inside it. We blame circumstances, genetics, bad luck, or other people for our failures because it's easier than admitting our own weakness. But the moment you stop lying to yourself, you take back your power. Truth, no matter how painful, is the foundation of growth. Through the audiobook, you can almost hear the steel sharpening in his voice as he explains that the human mind will always choose the path of least resistance. It will protect you from pain, but it will also protect you from progress. When Goggins decided to tell himself the truth, It was like ripping off a bandage that had covered years of rot. It stung. It burned. But underneath, he found something alive, the spark of potential that had been buried under excuses. He also talks about how society encourages weakness. We live in a culture that glorifies comfort, quick fixes, and validation. We post highlight reels instead of real life, and we confuse temporary motivation with lasting discipline. Goggins flips that narrative on its head. He doesn't tell you to feel better. He tells you to get better, and that requires work, dirty, difficult, daily work. The truth, he says, is not meant to make you comfortable. It's meant to make you capable. By the middle of chapter 2, we see Goggins beginning to rebuild his foundation. He starts setting small goals, forcing himself to study harder, run longer, and think deeper. But more importantly, he begins to understand that self-respect is earned, not given. You can't buy confidence. You have to build it, brick by brick, through consistent action and self-discipline. And that's the emotional heartbeat of this chapter, the promise of transformation through radical honesty. Once you accept who you truly are, you can become whoever you want to be. Goggins reminds us that no one is coming to save you. No coach, no friend, no miracle moment. You are the hero and the villain of your story. And every single day, you decide which one you're going to be. As the chapter closes, he delivers his second challenge to the reader, urging you to look into your own mirror and confront your truth. Not the Instagram version, not the edited version, the real one. Write down everything that's holding you back. Admit your weaknesses, confront your flaws, and then use that pain as fuel. Because once you own your truth, no one can use it against you. In Truth Hurts, Goggins tears down the walls between who we are and who we could be. It's not a motivational pep talk. It's a declaration of war against comfort, lies, and mediocrity. It teaches that self-awareness is not a luxury. It's a necessity. The truth will hurt, but the lies will destroy you. So, when the audiobook voice fades out at the end of this chapter, what stays with you is this thunderous message. The truth will break you before it builds you. But on the other side of that pain is freedom. The freedom to become unbreakable. And that's the first real step toward mastering your mind and defying the odds. Chapter 3 of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, titled The Impossible Task, is where the story transforms from surviving to conquering, from fear to focus, from victimhood to victory. If the first 2 chapters showed us pain and honesty, this chapter shows us what happens when those forces collide and create transformation. It's the chapter where Goggins decides that his life will no longer be defined by excuses, background, or genetics. It will be defined by discipline, self-respect, and relentless pursuit of the impossible. The big promise of this chapter is that no task is truly impossible if you are willing to suffer, sacrifice, and give every ounce of yourself to reach the goal. The chapter opens in the most ordinary setting imaginable, a cockroach-infested kitchen. Goggins, now in his early 20s, is working as a pest control technician, spending his days spraying for cockroaches and cleaning grease traps in fast food restaurants. He's overweight, depressed, and lost. He wakes up every morning dreading the day, not because the work is hard, but because he knows deep down that he's living a lie. He's settled. He's playing small. And the man he sees in the mirror every day, the one who was once full of fear, excuses, and self-doubt, has returned with a vengeance. One night, while spraying a restaurant for cockroaches, he sees something on television that changes everything. A documentary about Navy SEALs. He watches these men endure unimaginable pain during training, cold, wet, and shivering, their faces twisted in agony, but still pushing forward. In that moment, something inside him snaps. He realizes that what he's been avoiding all his life, pain, struggle, discomfort, is exactly what has kept him weak. He decides he's going to become a Navy SEAL. The catch? He's 297 pounds, can barely run a quarter mile, and only has a few months before the next SEAL selection class. This is where the phrase "the impossible task" comes alive. Goggins knows that the odds are against him. Everyone would say it's impossible, and by all rational measures, they'd be right. But he's no longer living by rational rules. He's living by mental rules, the laws of the mind that say if you want something badly enough and are willing to suffer for it, you can change the trajectory of your entire life. The first big shift he describes is internal, the war between the comfort zone and the warrior mindset. He stops negotiating with his mind. He stops waiting to feel ready. Instead, he embraces a mindset that most people avoid. Discomfort is the gateway to greatness. He knows he has to lose over 100 pounds in just 3 months, and he doesn't have access to fancy equipment, trainers, or nutritionists. All he has is a pull-up bar, a stationary bike, a jump rope, and his own determination. What follows is one of the most powerful transformation stories you'll ever hear. Goggins wakes up before dawn every day, running until his lungs burn, biking until his legs go numb, swimming until his shoulders scream. He cuts out junk food, lives on chicken, vegetables, and mental toughness. Every night, he collapses in exhaustion, only to get up and do it again. He doesn't call this motivation. He calls it habitual suffering. He's training his mind to endure pain without breaking, to silence the voice that whispers, "I can't." Throughout the audiobook, his narration makes you feel every ounce of pain he endured. You can almost hear the pounding of his heart as he describes running in the cold rain, his legs bleeding from chafing, his lungs gasping for air, and his mind fighting for surrender. But with each step, he reminds himself of a simple truth. You don't find strength by avoiding pain. You find it by walking straight through it. And that's the big promise of this chapter, that every impossible goal is possible when you stop quitting yourself. Goggins calls it the 40% rule, the idea that when your mind tells you you're done, you've only reached 40% of your true capacity. The remaining 60% lives on the other side of pain, fear, and fatigue. Most people never find it because they never push that far. But if you're willing to dig deep enough, to go beyond comfort, beyond logic, beyond the limits of your own mind, you can uncover a level of strength that feels superhuman. The impossible task wasn't just about weight loss. It was about identity. Every drop of sweat, every burning muscle, every moment of doubt was part of a larger transformation, the creation of a new self. Goggins wasn't just preparing to become a Navy SEAL. He was preparing to kill the old version of himself, the lazy, fearful, broken man who had accepted mediocrity. He was proving that identity is a choice. You are not the person you were yesterday. You are the person you decide to become today, and that decision is made in the furnace of effort, not in the comfort of dreams. By the time Goggins steps onto the scale again, he's done what the recruiters thought was impossible. He's dropped over 100 pounds, passed the physical exams, and qualified for SEAL training. But more importantly, he's discovered that pain is not the enemy, it's the catalyst. Every day he suffered, he grew stronger. Every moment of discomfort brought him closer to freedom. This chapter is also where Goggins teaches one of his most enduring lessons. You must become your own hero. No one is coming to save you. No one will believe in you until you prove it first. And the way you prove it is by doing hard things, by chasing goals so big they scare you, so demanding they force you to change. As he narrates this part of his journey, Goggins' voice doesn't just tell a story, it dares you to act. He challenges listeners to identify their own impossible task. Maybe it's losing weight, starting a business, healing from trauma, or breaking an addiction. Whatever it is, he says the process is the same. Face the truth, do the work, embrace the pain, and never stop. The chapter closes with his signature challenge number 3, a mental exercise that perfectly encapsulates the promise of his philosophy. He asks you to list every obstacle you face and every excuse you've made, then attack each one with action. Turn your weaknesses into weapons. Turn your doubt into determination. Because when you refuse to quit, life has no choice but to surrender. In the end, the impossible task isn't really about Navy SEAL training. It's about redefining what's possible in your own life. It's about realizing that greatness is not a gift, it's a grind. It's earned through sweat, pain, failure, and persistence. And when Goggins says, "You can't hurt me," what he really means is this: once you master your mind, once you make peace with suffering, nothing can stop you. Not fear, not failure, not even the impossible. So when you finish this chapter, you're left with a single, electrifying truth. The impossible is not a wall, it's a door, and pain is the key that unlocks it. Chapter 4 of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, titled Taking Souls, is a masterclass in psychological warfare. Only this time, the battlefield isn't a desert or a gym floor. It's the space between your ears. This is the chapter where Goggins introduces one of his most electrifying and mindset-shifting concepts: taking souls. The phrase itself sounds fierce, almost vengeful, but in Goggins' world, it's not about hurting others. It's about dominating adversity so completely that your performance, your resilience, your refusal to quit becomes a force that breaks the will of your obstacles. In this chapter, he teaches that true power doesn't come from talent, luck, or privilege. It comes from mastering your response to suffering. The big promise here is simple yet revolutionary. When life tries to crush you, you can flip the script. You can take its soul. The chapter opens in the grueling, unforgiving environment of Navy SEAL training, also known as BUD/S, Basic Underwater Demolition/SEAL Training. By this point, Goggins has already transformed himself from a 297-pound exterminator into a lean, determined warrior in training. But BUD/S isn't just about physical fitness. It's designed to break people mentally. The goal is to find out who has the kind of heart that doesn't stop beating when everything else inside of them wants to give up. Out of hundreds of candidates, most will ring the bell and quit. Only a few will make it through Hell Week, the infamous 5 days of nonstop torture where you're kept cold, wet, hungry, and sleep-deprived. Goggins quickly realizes that everyone in this environment is suffering. Pain is universal here. The cold water spares no one. The hunger eats at every stomach. The exhaustion fogs every brain. But Goggins decides to look at the situation differently. Instead of focusing on how much he's hurting, he starts focusing on how much harder he can go, and how his attitude can start to affect the men around him, especially the instructors who are trying to break them. That's when he discovers what he calls the taking souls mindset. Here's how it works. When life, or a person, tries to bring you down, you flip the energy. You don't fight back with anger or revenge. You fight back with excellence. You outwork, outlast, and outperform your enemy until they have no choice but to respect you, even if they hate you. Goggins realizes that every time he smiles through pain, every time he does extra push-ups when the instructors aren't looking, every time he runs faster when others slow down, he's not just surviving, he's taking souls. This concept is so powerful because it applies to every corner of life. Whether you're in a toxic workplace, a competitive sports field, a difficult classroom, or a personal crisis, there will always be someone or something trying to break you. Goggins teaches that instead of collapsing under pressure, you can use that pressure as fuel. When people doubt you, when they expect you to fail, that's your opportunity to go further, push harder, and make them question their own limitations. As he says, you want to earn the right to be remembered. Taking souls is about showing the world, and yourself, that you can rise when everyone else falls. One of the most memorable parts of this chapter is Goggins' description of Hell Week. where the candidates are pushed beyond what seems humanly possible. They're soaked in freezing surf, forced to run miles in the sand, carry heavy boats over their heads, and do endless physical drills, all while sleeping maybe 2 hours in 5 days. Goggins explains that in those moments, it's not about physical strength anymore. The body has already given up. It's the mind that must carry you. And that's exactly where he gains his edge. When everyone else is shivering and miserable, he laughs. When others complain, he stays silent. When they look for reasons to quit, he looks for reasons to keep going. His unbreakable will becomes contagious, lifting up others and intimidating his instructors. In one scene, he recalls how the instructors tried to crush the class by making them do punishing drills in the cold surf over and over. Most of the men were barely hanging on, their teeth chattering, their muscles locking up. But Goggins started smiling and joking with the instructors, asking them if that was the best they had. His energy flipped the entire mood of the group. The instructors were supposed to be in control, but suddenly, they looked at Goggins differently. He had taken their souls, not by fighting them, but by thriving in their battlefield. The big promise of taking souls is that this mindset can turn suffering into strength, oppression into opportunity, and obstacles into open doors. It's the idea that pain is inevitable, but defeat is a choice. Goggins shows us that when you choose to confront pain with defiance instead of fear, you gain power that no one can take away from you. He then connects this mindset to everyday life. You don't need to be a Navy SEAL to take souls. You can take the souls of your doubts, your insecurities, your procrastination, or the people who underestimate you. Every time you go the extra mile when no one's watching, every time you show up when others have checked out, you're taking souls. You're proving that nothing and no one can define your limits except you. Another key message in this chapter is about attitude. Goggins explains that your attitude is your ultimate weapon. It's the one thing you can always control, no matter how bad things get. You can't control the weather, the pain, the people around you, or life's unfairness. But you can control your response. And when your response is stronger than your circumstances, you become unstoppable. That's what taking souls is all about. Owning your mindset so completely that you become the storm instead of fearing it. By the end of the chapter, Goggins challenges the listener directly, as if looking you in the eyes through the speaker. He tells you to identify the challenges, people, or situations that are trying to break you right now. Then, instead of avoiding them, use them. Turn every insult into inspiration, every doubt into determination, and every hardship into proof of your strength. Chapter 4 closes with one of Goggins' most famous mental exercises, Challenge 4, to find your own way to take souls. He asks you to write down your biggest adversaries or your toughest challenges and attack them through relentless action. Beat your rivals not with anger, but with excellence. Let your results be your revenge. In the audiobook, the energy is electric, pulsing with raw defiance and purpose. You can feel Goggins' voice burn through the words as he tells you that greatness isn't found in comfort. It's earned in chaos. Taking souls is more than a chapter. It's a philosophy for life. It promises that if you can endure with a smile, if you can keep showing up when life tries to bury you, you'll not only survive, you'll dominate. And that's the message that echoes long after the chapter ends. When the world turns against you, don't break. Break the world's expectations instead. When pain knocks you down, rise so high that even your enemies have to stand in awe. That's how you take souls. Chapter 5 of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, titled Armored Mind, is the moment where the philosophy of pain hardens into pure, unbreakable mental strength. If earlier chapters were about surviving trauma, facing truth, and embracing suffering, this chapter is about building a fortress around your mind, a shield forged through repetition, adversity, and deliberate discomfort. In Armored Mind, Goggins takes us deep into the psychology of resilience and shows how mental toughness isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, layer by layer, the same way a warrior puts on armor before going into battle. The big promise of this chapter is clear and life-changing. You can train your mind to become so strong that no challenge, pain, or failure can break you. The chapter begins with Goggins preparing for one of the most physically and mentally demanding challenges of his life, the infantry basic training course, and later, the Navy SEAL Hell Week redo after suffering from injuries. Most people would have quit after enduring what he already had: multiple broken bones, infections, extreme fatigue, and a body on the brink of collapse. But Goggins doesn't see these as reasons to stop. He sees them as opportunities to strengthen his armor. He knows that to survive elite military training, or life itself, he must become bulletproof, not physically, but mentally. This idea becomes the foundation of the entire chapter. If you callous your mind through consistent exposure to hardship, you can become immune to pain, fear, and doubt. He introduces the concept of callousing the mind, comparing mental toughness to the calluses that form on your hands after repeated friction. The first time you lift heavy weights, your skin rips. It hurts. But if you keep lifting, the skin toughens, the pain lessens, and soon you can handle more weight without even flinching. Goggins applies this exact principle to the brain. Every time you push past discomfort, whether it's running when you're exhausted, studying when you're distracted, or getting up early when you'd rather sleep, you're building a thicker layer of mental armor. Over time, those layers become a shield against the things that once crushed you. What makes this chapter especially powerful in audiobook form is Goggins' tone, raw, direct, and almost defiant. You can hear the grit in his voice as he describes waking up every morning sore, broken, and mentally fried, but still lacing up his shoes to run miles in the freezing dark. He doesn't glamorize the grind. He exposes it. He wants listeners to feel the exhaustion, the monotony, the self-doubt, and then understand that those are exactly the ingredients required to forge an armored mind. As he says, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall back on your training. The mind, just like a muscle, must be conditioned through suffering until discipline becomes automatic. One of the defining stories in this chapter is when Goggins pushes through Navy SEAL training while dealing with severe stress fractures and pneumonia. His body is screaming, his instructors are merciless, and the ocean is freezing. But instead of seeing pain as an enemy, he treats it like an ally. He learns to compartmentalize suffering, to tell himself, this pain will end, but if I quit now, the regret will last forever. That mantra becomes his internal armor, a mental coating against the external chaos. The big promise of Armored Mind is that once you condition your brain to stay calm and focused in the face of pain, you can handle anything life throws at you. Goggins insists that most people crumble not because their bodies are weak, but because their minds aren't prepared. He argues that modern life has made us soft, too comfortable, too easily discouraged, too allergic to discomfort. He warns that the greatest danger isn't failure or pain, it's becoming mentally fragile. And the cure? Repetition, exposure, discipline, the daily decision to do something hard, not for a reward, but to build mental armor. Goggins also shares the psychological tools he uses to reinforce his resilience. One of them is visualization, not the feel-good, daydream version, but the gritty, realistic kind. He doesn't just imagine success. He visualizes every obstacle, every failure, every ounce of pain he'll face along the way. By mentally rehearsing the worst-case scenarios, he takes away their power. When the pain comes, he's already met it in his mind. He's already won that battle before it even begins. This method of mental pre-exposure is one of the cornerstones of his armored mindset. It's not about hoping things go well. It's about preparing for when they don't. Another crucial element of this chapter is Goggins' relationship with fear. He doesn't pretend that fear disappears when you're tough. It doesn't. Fear remains, but your response changes. Instead of freezing, you act. Instead of backing down, you move forward anyway. He explains that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's mastery over it. Fear becomes another tool, another weight in your mental gym that makes you stronger with every repetition. The armored mind, he says, isn't about not feeling pain or fear. It's about not letting them control you. What's remarkable is how universal his message feels. You don't need to be in the military or run ultramarathons to understand this chapter. Goggins is talking to anyone who's ever faced hardship, students battling stress, parents juggling responsibilities, entrepreneurs dealing with failure, athletes chasing big goals, or anyone struggling to stay disciplined when life feels overwhelming. He's telling you that you can armor your mind through the consistent practice of doing things you don't want to do. Every time you choose the harder path, you're sharpening your edge. Every time you face a setback without quitting, you're thickening your armor. The big takeaway is that mental toughness isn't some mystical trait. It's built through choices, small, daily, unglamorous choices that accumulate into unshakable strength. Goggins says, you can't fake resilience. You can't buy it. You earn it in the dark when no one's watching. He reminds us that the mind, once hardened by discipline, becomes your most powerful weapon in life. As the chapter nears its end, Goggins challenges the listener to build their own mental armor through deliberate hardship. His challenge number 5 asks you to do something that makes you uncomfortable every day. Run when you don't want to, study longer than you think you can, wake up earlier, push past the point of fatigue, and track your progress. With every act of discomfort, you're hammering another plate onto your armor. Over time, your mind becomes conditioned to thrive under pressure, not collapse under it. In the audiobook, his closing words feel like a rallying cry. When you arm your mind, you take away the world's power to break you. That's the essence of Chapter 5, the realization that life will always test you, pain will always find you, but with an armored mind, you don't have to fear the storm. You become the storm. So when the narrator's voice fades, what lingers is the thunder of Goggins' message echoing in your head. Build your armor, face your pain, and never let the world see you break. Because once your mind is armored, nothing, not failure, not fear, not even life itself, can hurt you anymore. Chapter 6 of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, titled It's Not About a Trophy, is where the story transcends the physical grind and enters the spiritual realm of purpose. In the earlier chapters, Goggins has already built his foundation. He's embraced pain, taken souls, and forged an armored mind. But here, he delivers one of the most profound lessons of the entire book. True greatness is not about medals, recognition, or trophies. It's about mastery of self. This chapter peels back the illusion that external success defines achievement, and instead, Goggins shows that the ultimate victory is internal. It's not what you earn, it's who you become. The chapter begins with Goggins describing his entry into the world of ultra-endurance racing, a sport so demanding that even the toughest athletes question their sanity for participating. After surviving Navy SEAL Hell Week, Army Ranger School, and several near-death military experiences, Goggins finds himself searching for a new mountain to climb. He's restless. The uniform may have changed, but the battle is the same, the war within. He realizes that his purpose is not to collect achievements. It's to continue testing his limits. And that's when he hears about the San Diego One Day, a 24-hour ultramarathon where runners complete as many miles as possible on a 1-mile track. Here's the twist. At this point, Goggins is not an experienced runner. He's muscular, heavy, and built more like a powerlifter than a marathoner. Running long distances seems almost impossible for someone his size. But true to Goggins' form, He doesn't let logic interfere with desire. He signs up with no specialized training, no running background, and no plan. Just sheer willpower and an obsession to discover how much further he can push himself. The race becomes a brutal metaphor for the entire chapter. During those 24 hours, Goggins' body disintegrates piece by piece. By the 70-mile mark, his feet are bleeding, his legs are locking up, and he's urinating blood. The pain is indescribable. Most people would have stopped long before. But Goggins keeps going. Not for fame, not for records, not for applause. He runs because he's chasing something far more powerful, the limit of his soul. Every step becomes a test of his mental and physical endurance, a tug-of-war between agony and purpose. This is where Goggins introduces one of his most transformative ideas, the difference between motivation and drive. Motivation, he says, is temporary. It's a spark that fades the moment things get hard. But drive, true, deep, unrelenting drive, comes from something much deeper. Drive is purpose. Drive is what keeps you moving when your muscles fail and your mind begs you to stop. In the audiobook, his tone shifts from storyteller to mentor as he explains that success built on external validation is fragile. It crumbles when the applause stops. But success built on self-mastery lasts forever. The big promise of this chapter is that fulfillment doesn't come from trophies. It comes from transformation. Goggins argues that most people chase goals for the wrong reasons. They want praise, recognition, or the comfort of being called the best. But when the race is over, when the medals gather dust and the spotlight fades, what's left? If your effort was driven by ego, you'll always be hungry for the next fix. But if it was driven by the desire to evolve, you'll never run out of fuel. As he pushes through the final hours of that 24-hour race, Goggins begins to enter a state he calls the governor effect. He compares the human brain to a car's speed limiter. It's designed to protect you from overexertion. When your body screams, "I can't go on," that's not your limit. It's your mind's safety mechanism trying to protect you. In truth, he says, most people only operate at 40% of their potential. The remaining 60% is locked away behind fear and comfort. The only way to access it is by forcing yourself into suffering again and again until the mind learns that pain is not the end, it's a doorway. Through vivid storytelling, Goggins describes hallucinating, limping, and nearly collapsing on the track. But each time he wants to stop, he reminds himself that greatness doesn't live in comfort. It lives in discomfort. The deeper the pain, the greater the transformation. By the end of the race, he's run over 100 miles in 19 hours, shattering not only expectations, but his own understanding of what's possible. And yet, when the race ends and people rush to congratulate him, Goggins doesn't feel pride. He feels curiosity. He's not satisfied. Not because he's ungrateful, but because he realizes the trophy means nothing compared to the self-knowledge he gained. He's seen a side of himself that can't be bought or praised. He's met the version of David Goggins who exists beyond the limits of pain, beyond comfort, beyond ego. That's the victory he's been searching for. The emotional heartbeat of this chapter is humility. Goggins reminds listeners that you don't need recognition to validate your greatness. You don't need anyone to see your grind or applaud your effort. The work itself is the reward. Every time you push through suffering, you become a little more disciplined, a little more resilient, a little more free. The trophies of life, money, fame, medals, are temporary, but the lessons you learn in the trenches stay with you forever. Goggins' voice in this section is almost spiritual, but still sharp and uncompromising. He warns that comfort is the silent killer of potential. People chase happiness, but what they really crave is meaning, and meaning comes from struggle. When you stop chasing trophies and start chasing growth, every challenge becomes sacred. Every pain becomes progress. The big takeaway from "It's not about a trophy, is that self-mastery is the only prize worth fighting for. The chapter invites you to redefine success. Success isn't about being number one. It's about being better than yesterday. It's about learning to find joy in the process, even when no one is watching. When you stop competing with others and start competing with your own limits, you'll discover a power that never fades. As the chapter ends, Goggins introduces Challenge 6, urging listeners to reflect on their own motivations. Why do you chase what you chase? Is it for validation or transformation? He challenges you to find a goal that scares you, not because of the trophy at the end, but because of the person you'll have to become to achieve it. He reminds you that the goal is not the finish line. The goal is evolution. In the audiobook, his closing words strike like thunder. It's not about a trophy. It's about building a soul so strong that even when life tries to break you, you smile back and say, "Is that all you've got?" This chapter is the turning point of Can't Hurt Me. It's where the warrior sheds his armor not to rest, but to reveal the truth beneath it, that greatness isn't earned in applause, but in the quiet moments when you choose to suffer for something bigger than yourself. So when the narrator's voice fades, what lingers isn't the image of medals or records. It's a simple, burning idea. The real reward is becoming unrecognizable to your former self. Because when you stop chasing trophies and start chasing purpose, life can't hurt you anymore. Chapter 7 of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, titled The Most Powerful Weapon, is where the book takes a thrilling psychological turn. If the previous chapters were about enduring pain, confronting fear, and mastering the body, this one is about unlocking the full, unrestrained power of the human mind, the real weapon behind every act of greatness. Goggins calls the mind the most powerful weapon, not because of its intelligence, but because of its ability to control everything else: your body, your emotions, your reactions, and ultimately, your destiny. This chapter is both a battle manual and a spiritual manifesto, teaching that once you master your mind, you can do the impossible, not once, but over and over again. The chapter opens with Goggins deep in the world of ultra-endurance sports. He's already completed multiple ultramarathons, the Badwater 135, and countless military challenges. His body is battle-scarred, his joints are damaged, and his muscles ache constantly. Most people at this stage would stop, retire, and proudly display their achievements. But not Goggins. Because for him, it's never been about the medals. It's about finding what's left inside the mind once the body has nothing left to give. He's hunting for the edge beyond the edge. He describes how he begins to notice a pattern during these brutal events. When his body breaks down, when his knees swell, his vision blurs, and his heart feels like it's about to explode, there's always a voice that whispers, "You're done." But he also notices something miraculous. If he ignores that voice and keeps pushing, something else happens. The body adapts, the pain shifts, and suddenly he discovers a second wind, a deeper gear of energy and focus that feels almost supernatural. It's in those moments that he realizes the mind is the gatekeeper to human potential. The body will always quit first. The mind just needs to be convinced to keep going. That's when Goggins introduces one of his most famous concepts, the cookie jar. The cookie jar is a mental tool, a strategy he uses to access strength when everything else is gone. He explains it like this: every time you overcome something hard in your life, every victory, every challenge survived, every act of discipline, you earn a cookie. You store that moment in your mental cookie jar. Then, when life hits hard, when the pain is overwhelming and your motivation disappears, you reach into that jar and pull out a reminder of what you've already survived. For Goggins, the cookie jar isn't about nostalgia, it's about proof. Proof that you've done hard things before and you can do them again. When you're out on a race course, bleeding and limping, or when life feels unbearable, those cookies become fuel. They remind you that you've built evidence of resilience. The cookie jar is the most powerful psychological weapon in his arsenal because it transforms weakness into confidence and despair into power. The big promise of this chapter is that your mind, when trained, can turn suffering into strength. It's the weapon that can override your biology. It can silence fear, numb pain, and push you beyond what you think is possible. But this power doesn't come easily. It has to be earned through deliberate suffering and consistent practice. Goggins compares the process to forging steel. The mind becomes strong only when it's exposed to fire again and again. Throughout the audiobook, Goggins' narration vibrates with intensity as he recalls his experiences during the Hurt 100, an infamous 100-mile race through the mountains of Hawaii. The terrain is brutal: mud, rocks, steep climbs, and relentless heat. Around mile 70, his body begins to collapse. His feet are torn open, his legs feel like concrete, and he's hallucinating from exhaustion. Most people would have stopped long before, but this is where Goggins' mental training takes over. He begins to talk to himself, not kindly, not softly, but with the commanding tone of a drill instructor. He calls it self-talk, and it becomes another key weapon in this chapter. He says that your inner dialogue is either your greatest ally or your deadliest enemy. When you allow your mind to control you, it will protect you. But protection is not growth. The mind will always choose safety over progress. So you have to flip the script. You have to train your self-talk to sound like a commander, not a victim. He tells himself, "You've been here before. You've done worse. You don't stop when you're tired. You stop when you're done." Those words, repeated like a battle hymn, pull him through the agony. And that's another powerful promise of this chapter. The words you feed your mind determine how far you go. Positive thinking alone isn't enough. What Goggins teaches is controlled thinking, the conscious redirection of mental energy toward purpose instead of pain. He insists that your brain is the most adaptable muscle in your body, but only if you train it with repetition and focus. Just as a soldier must drill for war, your thoughts must be disciplined daily through action. As the chapter progresses, Goggins explains that the mind's power is not about eliminating weakness. It's about accepting it and using it. He admits that fear and doubt never disappear completely. He still gets scared. He still feels pain. But his weaponized mind knows how to respond differently. When fear shows up, he doesn't retreat. He leans in. When pain arrives, he welcomes it as proof that he's growing stronger. When failure strikes, he studies it instead of running from it. That shift, from avoidance to mastery, is the difference between the ordinary and the extraordinary. He also warns that mental toughness without purpose can become destructive. The point isn't to suffer endlessly. It's to harness suffering for growth. The most powerful weapon in the world is a mind that knows why it's fighting. Once you find your why, your reason to push beyond pain, your limits dissolve. Goggins found his why in service, discipline, and relentless self-improvement. He runs not for medals, but for mastery. By the end of the chapter, he reveals another life-changing insight. The mind is like a muscle, but it forgets quickly. You can't build it once and expect it to last forever. You have to sharpen it daily. That's why Goggins continues to push himself even after success, to stay sharp, to stay humble, to stay ready. Because complacency is the rust that dulls the weapon. The Challenge 7 at the end of this chapter reinforces this message. He asks listeners to build their own cookie jar, to write down every moment of personal triumph, every hardship survived, and every challenge conquered. Keep that list visible. When life tests you, read it and remind yourself of your strength. Because once you realize that your past victories live inside you, you'll never face the future unarmed. In the audiobook, the chapter closes with a thunderous energy that feels both triumphant and intimate. Goggins reminds you that the most powerful weapon on earth isn't your muscles, your job title, or your bank account. It's your mind. It's the ability to suffer, adapt, and rise again and again, no matter how many times life tries to break you. And when the narrator's voice fades, what remains is a single, electrifying truth that Goggins drives home. If you can control your mind, you control your world. The mind is your most powerful weapon, and once it's sharpened, there's nothing it can't cut through. Chapter 8 of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, titled Talent Not Required, is the defiant heartbeat of the entire book, a powerful rejection of excuses, limitations, and the myth of natural talent. In this chapter, Goggins dismantles the comforting illusion that greatness is reserved for the gifted few. Instead, he argues that what truly separates the extraordinary from the average is not talent. It's obsession, discipline, and relentless consistency. The big promise of this chapter is simple but life-changing. You don't need to be special to achieve greatness. You just need to outwork everyone who thinks they are. The chapter opens with Goggins reflecting on his transformation from a broken, insecure young man to one of the world's toughest endurance athletes and military operators. He doesn't present himself as superhuman. He presents himself as proof of what ordinary people can become when they refuse to quit. Talent Not Required begins with humility. Goggins admits that he was never the fastest, strongest, or smartest person in any room. In fact, he spent much of his early life being underestimated. He failed classes, flunked tests, and faced rejection after rejection. But instead of accepting those limitations, he decided to redefine the rules of the game. What he discovered, and what this chapter teaches so powerfully, is that talent might open doors, but only discipline keeps them open. Goggins tells stories of his grueling preparation for elite military training and ultramarathons. But what stands out isn't his success, it's his process. He describes waking up before dawn to train, even when he was sore, tired, or unmotivated. He explains how he learned to embrace monotony, repeating the same painful tasks day after day, until effort became instinct. That's when he realized the truth. Most people give up not because they lack ability, but because they can't handle boredom, repetition, and hard work without instant results. The tone of this chapter in the audiobook feels like an unrelenting challenge to the listener. Goggins doesn't let you sit back and admire him. He pulls you into his mindset, daring you to face your own complacency. He explains that when people say, "You're so lucky," or "You're so talented," they're really trying to protect their own egos. It's easier to believe that success comes from talent than to admit that it comes from suffering. Because if it's talent, then you're off the hook. But if it's effort, if it's raw, unfiltered grind, then the responsibility falls on you. One of the central themes in Talent Not Required is the power of consistency over intensity. Goggins recalls countless moments where he didn't feel like training, but did it anyway, not because he was motivated, but because he had made a deal with himself. He calls this the contract. It's not written on paper, it's written in your actions. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you strengthen that contract. Every time you break it, you weaken your credibility with your own mind. And according to Goggins, once your mind learns that you don't mean what you say, it will stop believing you. And that's when you lose all power. He also introduces the concept of the accountability mirror again here, reinforcing that progress is not about pretending to be perfect, but about being brutally honest. You might not be talented, you might not be special, but you can outwork anyone. Goggins reminds listeners that discipline isn't glamorous, it's quiet, lonely, and often invisible. The greatest gains happen when no one is watching. The real battle, he says, is fought in silence, in those early mornings and late nights when you choose effort over excuses. As the chapter unfolds, Goggins gives an inside look at how he approached some of his most grueling challenges. Whether it was training for the Badwater 135, one of the hardest ultramarathons on Earth, or setting the world record for most pull-ups in 24 hours, Goggins didn't rely on talent. He relied on process. He practiced what he calls micro goals, breaking huge, intimidating tasks into small, manageable steps. Instead of thinking about 100 miles, he focused on the next step, the next minute, the next breath. That's how you win the long game. Talent burns out when things get hard. Discipline endures because it doesn't depend on how you feel. The big promise of this chapter is that anyone, anywhere, can become exceptional through relentless effort. Goggins wants listeners to stop worshiping talent and start respecting hard work. He explains that talent can give you an early advantage, but it's discipline that creates legends. The world is full of talented people who never reach their potential because they never learn to suffer, adapt, and persevere when things go wrong. The most dangerous person, he says, is not the most gifted, it's the one who never stops improving. Goggins also explores the mental toll of sustained effort. He acknowledges that consistency can be exhausting, that the grind can wear you down. But that's where growth lives. He calls it staying in the fight. The fight isn't against others, it's against your own laziness, your own comfort, your own mind's desire to take the easy way out. He reminds us that greatness doesn't require perfection, it requires persistence. Every day you show up, you're reinforcing a mindset that says, I may not be talented, but I will not be outworked. The audiobook narration in this section carries an electric, almost sermon-like rhythm. You can hear the conviction in Goggins' voice when he talks about the difference between interest and commitment. Interest is doing something when it's convenient. Commitment is doing it when it's not. That's why, he insists, most people never find their limits. They quit long before they get there. He also points out that talent not required doesn't just apply to athletics. It applies to every part of life: career, education, relationships, and self-improvement. Whether you're a student, an artist, an entrepreneur, or a parent, you have the power to outlast, outlearn, and outwork anyone around you if you're willing to do the work every single day. By the end of the chapter, Goggins offers Challenge 8, urging listeners to identify one skill or goal they've avoided because they think they're not good at it. Then, instead of waiting for talent, he challenges you to commit to practice and repetition for 30 days, without excuses, without breaks, without negotiating. The lesson? Mastery is not about being naturally good. It's about being relentless enough to improve when others stop. As the chapter closes, his message rings like a war cry. You don't need to be talented to change your life. You just need to refuse to quit. He reminds you that the most powerful people in history weren't born with extraordinary gifts. They were ordinary people who made extraordinary choices again and again until they became unstoppable. When the audiobook fades into silence, the echo of Goggins' words remains, challenging you to rethink everything you've believed about success. Talent might make the game easier, but discipline wins it. And the real prize isn't the trophy. It's knowing that every inch of your progress was earned, not given. So the next time you doubt yourself, remember Goggins' creed from Chapter 8. Talent is optional. Effort is mandatory. Because in the end, success doesn't belong to the gifted, it belongs to the obsessed. Chapter 9 of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, titled Uncommon Amongst Uncommon, is the point in the story where mental toughness evolves into a philosophy of life, a mindset so rare and relentless that it separates the great from the merely good. In this chapter, Goggins takes the listener beyond the limits of hard work and pain into the deeper territory of identity, excellence, and legacy. The title itself carries a challenge. It's not enough to be uncommon in a world of average. You must become uncommon amongst the uncommon. You must stand out even among the elite. The big promise of this chapter is nothing less than mastery, the kind of personal evolution that makes you unstoppable, no matter the environment or the competition. The chapter opens with Goggins already at the top of the military world. He's a Navy SEAL, an Army Ranger School graduate, and a veteran of some of the most brutal endurance events ever created by human beings. By this point, he's already proven himself to be extraordinary. But Goggins isn't interested in being extraordinary. He's obsessed with what lies beyond that. He wants to discover what happens when a person stops measuring themselves against others and starts measuring themselves against their own potential. Uncommon amongst uncommon isn't about being better than someone else. It's about holding yourself to a higher standard when no one else is watching. He begins by describing the culture inside the SEAL teams, an environment filled with some of the toughest, most skilled warriors on the planet. Everyone there is disciplined. Everyone there is strong. Everyone there has suffered to get in. But even among these warriors, Goggins notices something, a subtle line between those who are satisfied with elite and those who are obsessed with becoming legendary. Many SEALs, once they earn the trident, the symbol of SEAL qualification, relax. They've made it. They're proud, respected, and revered. But Goggins refuses to settle. He tells himself, if I stop improving, I die. That's where the concept of being uncommon amongst the uncommon is born. Goggins decides to keep pushing when everyone else stops. He volunteers for the hardest tasks, trains longer than anyone else, and refuses to take the easy way out, even when surrounded by men who already represent the best of the best. He doesn't do it for recognition or praise. He does it because he's in constant competition with his own reflection, the man in the mirror who knows whether he truly gave his all. In the audiobook, you can feel the fire in Goggins' voice as he explains that success can be just as dangerous as failure. Success breeds comfort, and comfort kills potential. When you've achieved something impressive, it's tempting to rest, to coast, to let the applause sink in. But Goggins warns that the second you relax, you start to decay. The greatest threat to greatness is satisfaction. And that's why the uncommon mindset must never rest. It's a lifelong pursuit, not a one-time victory. The big promise of this chapter is that true excellence is not about what you do. It's about who you become. Anyone can work hard for a short burst of time. Anyone can endure pain for a reward. But to be uncommon amongst the uncommon means to live a life of relentless self-discipline, where your standards remain high regardless of circumstances, rewards, or recognition. Goggins illustrates this point with vivid stories from his time as a Navy SEAL instructor. He recalls how, during Hell Week, candidates were pushed to their physical and psychological breaking points. Most people focus on surviving the pain, but Goggins learned to own it. As an instructor, he could easily have taken it easy. He had earned his place, his respect, and his authority. But instead, he chose to set an example so extreme that it made even the toughest recruits question their own effort. He trained harder than those he trained. He ran farther, lifted heavier, and slept less, not to show off, but to embody his philosophy. You can't hurt me because I won't stop. He explains that being uncommon amongst the uncommon requires self-regulation and brutal honesty. You can't lie to yourself about effort. You can't inflate your ego or hide behind your achievements. Goggins believes that the most dangerous words in the world are good enough. Those words, he says, have destroyed more dreams than failure ever could. When you decide that you've done enough, you're silently telling your potential to stop growing. One of the most profound moments in this chapter comes when Goggins admits that his obsession with excellence often made him feel alone. The higher your standards, the fewer people can keep up. Many of his peers misunderstood him. They thought he was showing off, that he was trying to outshine others. But in truth, Goggins wasn't competing against anyone but his former self. This loneliness, he explains, is the cost of greatness. If you want to be uncommon amongst the uncommon, you must be willing to walk a solitary path. Not everyone will understand your hunger, but they'll all feel your presence. Another key idea Goggins explores in this chapter is the concept of identity reset. He explains that most people build their identities around accomplishments, titles, ranks, positions, or status. But when you define yourself by what you've already achieved, you trap yourself in the past. Instead, he argues, you must constantly evolve, constantly redefine who you are. The only identity worth keeping is that of the person who never stops improving. That's the mindset that makes you unstoppable, because even when you lose, you learn. Even when you fail, you grow. The big takeaway from Uncommon Amongst Uncommon is that true greatness is infinite. There is no finish line. Once you master a skill, you move on to another. Once you conquer a fear, you face a new one. The uncommon man or woman is always chasing the next challenge, not for external glory, but for internal peace, the peace that comes from knowing you gave everything you had. In the audiobook, Goggins' voice sharpens as he gives his challenge number 9 to listeners. He tells you to raise your standards, even when you're already doing well. If you're the best in your class, in your office, or on your team, good. Now push harder. Find a way to improve when others have stopped trying. Become so disciplined, so consistent, and so committed to your craft that you redefine what's possible in your environment. Don't just be respected, be undeniable. As the chapter draws to a close, Goggins reminds you that the uncommon mindset isn't glamorous. It's lonely, exhausting, and endless, but it's also liberating. Because when you stop comparing yourself to others and start living by your own relentless standards, you become truly free. You stop being controlled by validation, applause, or fear of failure. You live for progress, not praise. When the audiobook fades out, what lingers isn't just inspiration, it's challenge. Goggins leaves you staring into your own reflection, asking yourself the hard question, am I giving everything I have, or have I become comfortable with being good enough? The answer, he says, determines everything. So the essence of chapter 9 is this: being uncommon amongst the uncommon means never arriving, never settling, and never surrendering. It's about living every day with the fire of someone who refuses to be average, even in a room full of excellence. Because in the end, the real victory isn't being better than others. It's becoming better than who you were yesterday, again and again, until the end. Chapter 10 of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, titled The Empowerment of Failure, is one of the most profound and transformational chapters of the entire book. If earlier chapters taught us how to master pain, develop mental armor, and defy limits, this one teaches us how to make peace with the one force that stops more dreams than any other: failure. But Goggins doesn't just redefine failure, he weaponizes it. He transforms it from something to be feared into something to be embraced and used as fuel. The big promise of this chapter is liberating and revolutionary. Failure isn't the end of the road, it's the path itself. When you stop fearing it, you become unstoppable. The chapter begins with Goggins reflecting on his history of falling short, and not just once, but repeatedly. By this point, he's already built an incredible resume: Navy SEAL, Army Ranger, ultra-endurance athlete, motivational powerhouse. Yet, Goggins doesn't start this chapter with victory. He starts with defeat. He takes us back to one of the most painful moments in his career, the time he attempted to break the world record for the most pull-ups in 24 hours. 3 separate times, he trained, prepared, and put his body on the line to achieve something no human had ever done. And 3 times, he failed. In his first attempt, everything that could go wrong did. His hands tore open, his muscles failed, and his body shut down before he even reached the halfway mark. He had trained for months, endured pain most people would never imagine, and still fell short. The second attempt wasn't much better. He improved, but still missed the mark. It would have been easy to quit, to say I tried, and move on. But that's not the Goggins way. This is where he begins unpacking the true essence of the chapter. Failure is feedback. It's information. It's the most honest teacher you'll ever have, because it never lies to you. Failure exposes weaknesses, reveals blind spots, and strips away illusion. But most people never get to benefit from it because they let the emotional sting of falling short define them. They take failure personally instead of strategically. Goggins insists that if you can detach your ego from the result and focus on the lesson, you can turn every failure into a stepping stone toward mastery. In the audiobook, his voice carries both grit and wisdom as he describes sitting in silence after those failed attempts. His body wrecked, his spirit tested. He wasn't ashamed, he was curious. He studied every mistake, every technical error, every mental lapse. He dissected the pain like a scientist. He refused to label himself a failure because, in his mind, the only real failure is quitting. Every other form of falling short is just data. The big promise of this chapter is that once you redefine failure as growth, your entire world changes. You stop playing small. You stop hesitating. You start taking bigger risks because you understand that losing isn't losing, it's learning. Goggins says, "Failure gave me the gift of self-awareness." When you fail, you're confronted with the truth about who you are, how you think, and how you respond under pressure. That truth is priceless because it's the foundation for improvement. He connects this mindset to his time in the military, particularly his role as an instructor after graduating from SEAL training. Goggins recalls how many young recruits were terrified of messing up. They were obsessed with perfection. Every mistake felt like a personal defeat. But Goggins taught them that perfection is the enemy of progress. He encouraged them to fail faster and learn faster. The only way to grow, he told them, is to step into situations where failure is a real possibility. Comfort zones, he reminds us, don't produce growth, they produce decay. Throughout this chapter, he ties the concept of failure to humility. When you fail, your ego takes a hit, and that's a good thing. Ego blinds you to your weaknesses. Failure humbles you, forcing you to rebuild from a place of truth. Goggins argues that humility isn't weakness, it's strength under control. When you can look at your own flaws without denial or self-pity, you gain a kind of power that no one can take from you. He also uses his experience in endurance racing to hammer this point home. In the Badwater 135 and other ultra events, failure lurks at every mile. You can prepare perfectly and still have something go wrong. Weather changes. Your stomach turns. Your legs give out. The race doesn't care. But Goggins says that in those moments of breakdown, you find your real limits. And if you can stay calm, you can push past them. Every failure on the track became a new layer of mental callus, another plate of armor on his mind. Another powerful theme in this chapter is resilience through repetition. Goggins explains that success is never about one big win. It's about falling down and getting up again and again and again. The difference between the ordinary and the extraordinary isn't that the extraordinary never fails. It's that they never stay down. The uncommon people of the world, athletes, entrepreneurs, creators, are simply those who've learned to use failure as fuel. They run toward it, not away from it. In the audiobook, his Challenge 10 captures the spirit of the chapter perfectly. He asks listeners to write down their biggest failures and, next to each one, list the lessons they learned. Then, he challenges you to reframe those experiences, not as scars, but as strength. The more you fail, he says, the more proof you have that you're willing to take risks, and that's something to be proud of. The biggest takeaway from the empowerment of failure is that failure is inevitable, but defeat is optional. Every setback is an invitation to evolve. If you choose to accept that invitation, you become immune to fear because the worst-case scenario, failing, no longer holds power over you. Once you realize that failure can't hurt you, you become dangerous in the best possible way. You become free to chase impossible goals. As the chapter draws to a close, Goggins reflects on his final, successful attempt at breaking the pull-up record. After 3 failures, he finally did it. 4,030 pull-ups in 17 hours. But what made that victory meaningful wasn't the record itself. It was everything he learned from failing. Without those first defeats, he would never have discovered the strategy, discipline, and resilience required to win. Failure didn't block his path, it built it. When the audiobook fades, Goggins' message lingers in the air like a battle cry wrapped in truth. Failure will either break you or build you, but you get to choose. He reminds listeners that if you're afraid of failure, you're also afraid of growth. Every time you fail and get back up, you're proving to yourself that you're stronger than circumstance, tougher than pain, and braver than doubt. So, the core of Chapter 10 is this: failure is not your enemy, it's your greatest ally. It's the mirror that shows you who you really are and the forge that shapes who you're meant to become. And once you learn to see it that way, nothing, not rejection, not loss, not defeat, can ever stop you again. Because as Goggins says with his trademark intensity, you can fail 1,000 times, but you're never truly defeated until you stop trying. Chapter 11 of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, titled What If?, is the grand finale, the emotional crescendo of a story built on pain, purpose, and relentless human will. It's not just a closing chapter, it's a mirror Goggins holds up to your soul. In the earlier chapters, he taught us to confront pain, embrace discomfort, take souls, build mental armor, and redefine failure. But in this final chapter, he asks the most haunting and transformative question of all: what if? What if you gave everything? What if you stopped settling? What if you lived your entire life pushing the limits of what you thought was possible? The big promise of this chapter is both terrifying and liberating. If you commit to finding out who you could become, you will live a life without regret, and that is the ultimate victory. The chapter begins with Goggins reflecting on his entire journey: the trauma, the abuse, the poverty, the racism, the loneliness, the doubt, and how every single obstacle that tried to destroy him became a stepping stone to greatness. But instead of telling this story as a victory lap, he turns it into a challenge for the listener. He reminds us that his story isn't about being extraordinary. It's about what happens when an ordinary person refuses to quit. He wants you to imagine the version of yourself that exists beyond fear, beyond excuses, beyond pain. That's where the what if mindset begins. In the audiobook, Goggins' voice slows, deepens, and grows reflective. You can hear the weight of a man who has lived through hell and come out the other side stronger. He tells a story about how, later in life, after all his achievements, the SEALs, the ultramarathons, the pull-up record, the fame, he still found himself haunted by one image: the ghost of his potential self. He imagines dying one day and meeting the version of himself that had maximized every ounce of his talent, discipline, and courage. That version would look him in the eyes and ask, "What if you had tried harder? What if you had stopped making excuses? What if you had lived up to what you were capable of?" That image, he says, is what drives him every single day. Because the greatest fear in life is not death, it's dying with regret. It's realizing that you played small, that you had more to give but never gave it. What if is both a question and a philosophy. It's an invitation to live with urgency, to squeeze every drop of potential out of your time on Earth. The big promise of this chapter is that you can live a life of purpose, peace, and power, not by avoiding suffering, but by using it. Goggins insists that pain, failure, and struggle are not punishments. They're the raw materials of greatness. The people who achieve the impossible aren't superhuman. They're simply the ones who stopped running from discomfort. He says, when you embrace suffering, you become bulletproof. When you accept pain, you take away its power. To bring this philosophy to life, Goggins revisits key moments from his career, not to brag, but to show how the what if mindset changed everything. He recounts the times when he should have quit, like when he ran 100 miles on broken legs, or when his body bled through his shoes during a race, or when he faced 3 failed attempts at the pull-up record. In each of those moments, the easy path was to stop, to rationalize, to say enough. But instead, he asked himself, what if I keep going? What if there's more left in me? And every single time, the answer was the same. There was more. Every time he pushed through one perceived limit, he found another level of strength waiting behind it. That's the hidden power of the what-if mindset. It turns obstacles into invitations. Instead of saying, I can't, you start asking, what if I can? That single shift changes everything. Another powerful message in this chapter is about the danger of mediocrity. Goggins explains that comfort is the silent killer of potential. Most people, he says, are not living, they're existing. They go through life doing just enough to get by, never risking, never stretching, never truly discovering who they are. He calls this the soft life syndrome, a disease of modern society that keeps people weak, bored, and unfulfilled. But the cure, he argues, is within your control. You don't need more talent, more luck, or more time. You just need more commitment. You need to look yourself in the mirror and decide that your life will mean something. Goggins also reflects on how the what-if mindset applies beyond physical endurance. It's not just about running further or lifting heavier. It's about living deeper. What if you faced your trauma instead of numbing it? What if you started the business you've been afraid to start? What if you apologized to the person you hurt, or forgave the one who hurt you? What if you stopped caring about what people think and started living your truth? The possibilities are infinite, but only if you stop letting fear make your decisions for you. In this chapter, he also revisits the theme of accountability one last time. He reminds listeners that you can't fake discipline. You can't talk your way into greatness. You have to earn it every day. The what-if mindset demands radical honesty. It requires you to confront the gap between who you are and who you could be. Most people don't like that confrontation because it's uncomfortable. But Goggins insists that discomfort is the birthplace of growth. If you can sit in the fire long enough, you'll come out forged into something unrecognizable. The big takeaway from What If is that your potential is infinite, but it's not guaranteed. Every day, you either move closer to your highest self or further away from it. There's no neutral ground. Goggins tells listeners that one of the greatest tragedies in the world is wasted potential. People who had the capacity for greatness but chose comfort instead. He challenges you to ask yourself the same haunting question that has fueled his life. What if you tried just a little harder? What if you became everything you were meant to be? As the audiobook nears its end, Goggins gives his final challenge 11, one that perfectly encapsulates the entire spirit of the book. He asks you to visualize your what-if self, the version of you who never gave up, who never backed down, who lived with full effort every single day. Write down what that person looks like, how they act, how they think, how they live. Then, every day, take one step toward becoming that person. Because the only way to honor your potential is to pursue it relentlessly. The final moments of the audiobook are deeply moving. Goggins' voice, equal parts steel and sincerity, delivers one of the most memorable lines in motivational literature. When you die and meet the person you could have been, don't look away. Don't meet that person and feel regret. Meet them as an equal. That's the essence of What If. The pursuit of living so fully, so intentionally, that when the end comes, you can smile and say, I became everything I could be. And that's the big promise of this chapter, the culmination of Can't Hurt Me. Goggins isn't asking you to be perfect. He's asking you to be relentless, to trade comfort for purpose, to stop fearing failure, pain, and judgment. Because once you start living with the what if mindset, you stop existing like everyone else and start becoming the person you were born to be. So when the audiobook fades into silence, the message doesn't leave you. It echoes in your mind like a challenge written on your heart. What if you gave your all? What if you never quit? What if you finally found out who you really are? As the final chapter closes and the last echoes of "Can't Hurt Me" fade into silence, what lingers is not just a story, it's a transformation. This book is more than a memoir, more than a motivational manual. It is a wake-up call to every listener who has ever doubted themselves, every person who has settled for less, every soul that has mistaken comfort for peace. David Goggins' journey is not about superhuman talent. It's about superhuman effort. And in this conclusion, he delivers his ultimate message. You can become unstoppable, not by escaping pain, but by mastering it. In the audiobook's closing moments, Goggins reflects on the road he's traveled, from a childhood scarred by abuse and fear to becoming one of the world's toughest endurance athletes and a Navy SEAL legend. He has conquered mountains most of us would never dare to climb. But what makes his story extraordinary isn't the number of miles he ran, the pull-ups he did, or the records he broke. It's the mindset he built, the unbreakable belief that every one of us, no matter how broken or beaten, holds the power to rewrite our story. The big promise of "Can't Hurt Me" is crystal clear. You can master your mind and defy the odds. Pain will come, struggle will come, failure will come, but none of them have to define you. What defines you is how you respond. Goggins teaches that life's greatest victories aren't won in arenas or stadiums. They're won in silence, in the lonely hours before dawn, when you make the choice to do what others won't. Every chapter in this book builds upon that truth, hammering it into the soul like a forge creating steel. From the first chapter, "I should have been a statistic," Goggins shows that your past doesn't dictate your future. You may have been born into chaos, pain, or limitation, but you can rise above it if you stop making excuses and start taking ownership. That's where the journey begins, with accountability. Then in "Truth Hurts," he teaches the first law of transformation. You can't fix what you refuse to face. The mirror doesn't lie. To become great, you must first confront your flaws and fears without flinching. In "The Impossible Task," Goggins shows us the alchemy of hard work, how consistency turns weakness into power. When he lost 100 pounds in 3 months to qualify for Navy SEAL training, it wasn't talent that got him there. It was discipline, suffering, and the refusal to quit. Taking Souls sharpened that lesson into a weapon. When life or people try to break you, take their souls by outlasting their expectations. You don't fight back with words, you fight back with excellence. Then came Armored Mind, where Goggins revealed how to build resilience so thick that no pain can penetrate it. Mental toughness, he says, is a muscle, and it's forged through repetition, through deliberately choosing discomfort. It's not about a trophy stripped away the illusion of external validation. Success isn't measured by awards or recognition. It's measured by the strength of your character when no one's watching. By the time we reach the most powerful weapon, Goggins has handed us the key to everything: the mind itself. The body can endure incredible things, but only when the mind is in control. He teaches us about the cookie jar, the mental vault of past victories we can reach into whenever we doubt ourselves. Because proof of your strength is already inside you. You just have to remember it. Then, in Talent Not Required, he destroys one of the biggest myths of modern life, that only gifted people succeed. Goggins proves that consistency will always outlast talent. You don't need to be special. You just need to be obsessed. In Uncommon Amongst Uncommon, he takes that obsession to another level. Being great isn't enough. The true warrior's path is to keep growing even when you're already the best. The uncommon person pushes harder when everyone else relaxes. And when he gets to the empowerment of failure, he turns defeat into fuel. Goggins teaches us that every failure is a lesson wrapped in pain. If you can strip away your ego and learn from your losses, you'll come back stronger. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the foundation of it. And finally, in the hauntingly beautiful last chapter, What If? Goggins leaves us with a question that will echo forever. What if you gave everything you had? What if you never quit? What if you actually became the person you were meant to be? That question is the heartbeat of this entire book. It's not meant to inspire. It's meant to provoke, to make you uncomfortable enough to act. Because Goggins doesn't want you to admire him. He wants you to become your own version of him. The ultimate victory of Can't Hurt Me isn't about running 100 miles or breaking records. It's about breaking the limits inside your mind. It's about realizing that you are far stronger, smarter, and more capable than you've ever been told. The big result of this book, the transformation it offers, is self-mastery. If you follow Goggins' philosophy, you will no longer be at the mercy of fear, pain, or failure. You will own your life. You will stop waiting for motivation and start relying on discipline. You will stop chasing comfort and start embracing growth. And most of all, you'll stop running from pain and start using it. Because as Goggins says again and again, pain unlocks the door to power. By the end of the audiobook, it becomes clear that Can't Hurt Me isn't just David Goggins' story. It's a roadmap for every human being who wants to reclaim control of their destiny. It's about learning to find strength in struggle, meaning in suffering, and peace in persistence. When you finish this book, you don't just walk away inspired. You walk away changed. You begin to see every challenge as an opportunity, every failure as feedback, and every day as a chance to prove to yourself that you are tougher than life's hardest punches. So here's the truth that Goggins leaves you with, the truth that echoes long after the final sentence fades. You can't control life, but you can control your response. You can't avoid pain, but you can outlast it. You can't stop failure, but you can turn it into fuel. And once you master your mind, nothing, absolutely nothing, can hurt you anymore. If this audiobook summary of Can't Hurt Me inspired you, if you felt that spark deep inside reminding you that you are capable of so much more, then don't let it fade. Take action today. Start small, start anywhere, but start. And remember, discipline is a habit, not a feeling. Because at CliffNote Chronicles, we believe exactly what David Goggins believes. Your story isn't over, it's just getting started. And if you ever find yourself doubting your strength, just ask the question that changed Goggins' life forever. What if you gave everything you've got? What if you became unstoppable? That's not just a question, it's a challenge. One that could change your life forever.